Hey, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, hope everything's going well your side.
Yeah, it's going very well. So, after I think 6 years, just last time, 2016, I guess, we had a chance to have you in on Digital Zone, and it's very great to see you again here. Thank you so much for being with us here, and it means a lot to us, a lot
It's
to
great
us
to be a part
actually.
of it. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
thank you so much. So, if you like, we can just start your presentation.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
again.
thank you.
State first.
Hi everyone. Great to be on a call with so many folks across, I guess, mainly Europe and the Middle East, but potentially from around the world. Thank you for having me. My name is Will Critchlow. I'm the founder and CEO at Searchpilot, and today we're going to be talking about the future of SEO eventually. But we've got a couple of other bits to get into before that. So the thing that I find very exciting about being asked to give this presentation is that I get to combine a couple of my biggest passions. So I'm a massive SEO geek. That probably won't surprise anyone here. But I'm also a big basketball fan. And we will get on to the future of SEO, but we're going to get there via a circuitous route that takes us via basketball. So I don't know if anybody's seen a visualization like this before. This is it's what's called a shot chart in basketball. So it's kind of a heat map showing you the most common shooting locations in a game of basketball. This particular one is from the NBA, American Professional Basketball. It is the 200 most common shooting locations in the NBA. And we can see a few things going on here, even if we never played basketball. We can see that there's a lot of shots taken right around the rim. These are the dunks and layups. There are a lot of shots taken from outside the arc. These are worth 3 points for anybody who doesn't play basketball. The ones inside are worth 2 points. The ones outside are worth 3 points. So there's a lot of shots taken from long range, which are worth more. And then there's a lot of other shots in what is known as the mid-range. And the mid-range is essentially everything in between, everything that isn't a shot around the rim and isn't a 3-point shot from outside the arc. And the mid-range, a lot of the most famous shots of all time are from the mid-range. This is Michael Jordan, when I was growing up, winning an NBA championship from right about there, classic mid-range. So inside the 3-point line, but not a layup or a dunk either. But I'm slightly misleading you here. This shot chart that you're looking at here is actually not from the present day. This is what the game looked like over 20 years ago. So get that sinking into your brain for a second, and then let's look at what it looks like today. So flipping backwards and forwards, that's 20 years ago, and this is today. Can you see what's happened there? That's quite radical. So we're going to dig into what happened and why, and if we're lucky, what it's got to do with SEO. So yeah, okay. So what happened here? Well, the root cause of the change is the cameras that were installed in NBA stadiums, and probably more importantly, the machine learning and artificial intelligence that went with them, that not only tracked every single player on the court and the ball at every single second of every game, but also was able to analyze that game and track who was defending who was shooting from where, what kind of play they'd run to get in that situation. Essentially everything about what was going on. And this huge amount of data was suddenly not only captured, but analyzed by this kind of big data, machine learning, statistical analysis. And this enabled insights that had never been possible before, and gave coaches tools that they hadn't had, and led to some interesting changes in the game. So what we saw in the chart there was that the disappearance of the mid-range, and it hasn't disappeared entirely. And every time I talk about this, I get some people pointing out that the mid-range is very much not dead. And if you want to have that conversation with me, I'm very up for it, because I agree, but it was a little bit of a stretch from my analogy today. So come and chat to me about it on Twitter, where I'm at Will Critchlow. But for the purposes of this, they disappear essentially from the top 200 most shooting locations, most common shooting locations. So the mid-range becomes a much less popular shot over the last 20 years. And what we can see in the statistical data that led to this is that essentially they're 2-point shots that are almost as hard as the 3-point shots outside the arc. But because they're worth less, they're not as valuable. Now, of course, the dunks and the layups haven't gone away. So in the modern shot chart, we still see a lot of shots being taken from around here. And that's because these are easy enough to be worth taking, even though they're only worth 2 points. And the ones outside the arc are worth taking because they're worth so much more, half as much again. But the mid-range turns out often to be the wrong choice because they're kind of too hard for the benefits that are going to accrue. And okay, so that's interesting. That's what's happened over the last 20 years in professional basketball. Let's talk a little bit about SEO. What's going on that led me to preface my presentation with a whole load of basketball analytics? Well, I don't think it's cameras watching us in our office as we work, helping us type faster. Probably not going to be that. I think we need to look at the evolution of some other channels. So you're probably familiar with conversion rate testing, which focuses on converting more of your existing web traffic into whatever you want, customers, sign-ups, registrations, whatever it might be. And what we've been working on a lot over the last few years is SEO testing, which focuses on the top of the funnel, getting more visits into the website, in this case, particularly from organic search. And this is the basis, this is the equivalent, in my opinion, of the cameras that were getting installed in those NBA stadiums over the last 20 years. This is the technological breakthrough that enables strategic change. So let's talk about it a little bit. What SEO testing lets you do is it means that you can tie an individual change to your website to the actual specific outcome in organic search performance. This particular test here was a test of replacing templated content with uniquely written, carefully human written content on a bunch of pages, and it resulted in a 14% increase in organic traffic. And we can see that with a controlled scientific experiment that takes care of making sure that this wasn't down to outside factors, Google algorithm updates, site-wide changes, competitor actions, any of those kinds of things, and that we've isolated it down to being as a result of the specific change that we made to the site. Now, you'll see there's some links in the slides as we go through. The organizers are going to be sharing a link to my slides. I will also tweet them out afterwards. So again, you can follow me on Twitter at Will Critchlow if you want to get all of that kind of information. And we can actually even go further than this. So pure SEO testing focuses on the organic traffic that you get, but obviously we're business people and we want to know that we're impacting revenue and business metrics in the way that we hope. And so full funnel testing takes it all the way, combines essentially an SEO test and a CRO test to be able to say this change was a good idea because it drove more organic traffic and converted better, or whatever the case may be. And what this lets us do, in my opinion, is take more of these, take more of the shots around the rim, the high percentage chances to convert. So in my analogy, which we're going to flesh out in the course of the next half hour or so, these are winning tests. The dunks and the layups are winning tests. They're things that we have run that kind of scientific experiment on, and we know they're going to work. So they may be small, they may be little uplifts, but they're going to come in. They're going to work for us, and that's just like scoring around the rim. The other part of our strategy in this analogy is what's the 3-point shot? So what's the equivalent of the 3-point shot in a modern SEO strategy? Well, I think it's new pages, new content, new site sections, developing whole new areas of your website. This is definitely worth a lot, just like a 3-pointer. It's also very hard. It's also not what today's presentation is about. So this is not about content strategy or developing new site sections or the keyword research needed to do that. There are plenty of other people who are talking about these kinds of details. I'm going to focus on this stuff around the rim. And in particular, I'm going to focus on how we cut out the mid-range from our SEO strategies. And this is just like in the NBA. What we want to do is take fewer of these, seemingly attractive, but actually surprisingly low percentage shots. In the basketball analogy, that's where, it's surprisingly easy to get free in the mid-range, but you get that open shot and you miss it more often than you should. The equivalent for us as SEOs is untested on-site changes. I want us to kind of try to focus on making fewer of these, but these are deceptive. because we think from best practice, from our experience, from things Google has said, that we might have some great ideas here. But too often, these are neutral. They don't have a big enough positive impact, or worse, they're actually even negative. And in those situations, we're actively hurting our SEO performance. But certainly too often they aren't positive, whether they're neutral or negative. And so we want to kind of cut them out of the game, run more tests, and in the basketball analogy, get to the rim more often. So let's make this concrete for a second. Let's talk about what kind of actual website change we might be talking about here while continuing the basketball analogy. So anybody who's played any kind of sport at a good level, or this applies to all kinds of other stuff. If you've given a music performance, or you've been in a great drama show or whatever, there's that moment where you do something really well and it's in front of a big crowd, and you're just you're feeling very excited about how this is going. Basketball, this would be a classic example. You pull a crossover, your defender falls over. Now, many of us, I'm sure, feel just as excited as this at work. Very often, we're doing our SEO work, and we get that moment where the crowd goes wild. Specific example might be that you find a specific amazing keyword research insight. So you've been working on this, you've downloaded all the data, you've gone to your different tools and your different sources, and you've just seen that insight, you've seen that thing that you're like, yes, I can use that on my website, in my business. So you're feeling great about yourself. You pull up for the jump shot, you feel the ball release. This is actually putting the thing into practice, actually doing the thing that is going to result in the benefit that you seek. In our basketball, in our SEO analogy, rather, this is actually making the change to the website, right? So you've had your keyword research insight. Now you're going to your website and you're making those changes. You're going to the pages, you're modifying your titles, for example, your metadata on those pages. You're matching that search intent that you discovered via your keyword research. And sometimes you just get that massive air ball. Right? I don't know how well you can see that on the screen, but that ball just misses that net completely, doesn't even touch the rim. What's the SEO equivalent of an air ball? Well, it's making the change based off that research and that insight that you discovered, and having something like this happen. This is a test we actually ran. This particular minus 27% organic traffic. That's pretty horrifying. And I think we've all been there. We've certainly, anybody who's played basketball has thrown up an air ball. Every single SEO has thrown up the SEO equivalent of an air ball and seen this kind of drop in organic traffic for at least some changes that you've made. And so this is why we need to get to the rim. This is why we need to run those tests. But we should take a second and probably just step back and think a little bit about learning what we're actually talking about in practice, how this works. How do you run an SEO test? Well, people are probably very familiar with conversion rate testing, and we'll talk in a second about the differences between conversion rate optimization testing and SEO testing. But it's based on some similar statistical and mathematical principles, but the setup is a little different. So the first crucial thing to realize is that an SEO test runs over a site section. That's a group of pages that have a similar setup, similar page template. They're probably logically grouped in some way. And they have that similar page template, which means that we can apply our change to more than one page. We can apply our hypothesis across a group of pages. This particular example is a model example, obviously, very small site section. Normally we run on much larger section. This is an example of a group of flight pages where each page is flights to a specific location. And so we've got the group of pages that we want to run the test on. And then we have our hypothesis. We have our change that we want to make to the site that we believe is going to be a good idea, that we believe is going to bring us some of the benefit that we seek. And we express it like this. So we have the current layout. And then in this particular example, we're saying our hypothesis is that if we remove some of this written content up the page to the top of the page, it will be seen as more relevant and will rank better and will get more organic search traffic as a result. So we have our current template and our proposed template. And then what we need to do is apply that change to only some of the pages in the site section. And over at SearchPilot, where this is all we do, we have a process that randomizes this. So we're looking at all kinds of features of this site section: traffic levels, variance in the traffic levels, seasonality, conversion rates, all kinds of factors like that, and we're looking to create two similar groups of pages, what we call them buckets of pages. So the control pages and the variant pages. The control pages are going to stay unchanged in this model, and the variant pages, as you can see in the diagram here, are going to have the hypothesis applied. So the variant pages have that text moved up in this example. And what that means is that while the test is running, we have some group of pages, the ones in the pink dotted outline just here, that are the variant pages. These are going to have the change applied to them. So while the test is running, the website actually looks like this. Control pages are unchanged. Variant pages have the change applied to them. And there's more detail that we could go into here in terms of, I mentioned the full funnel testing earlier, where we combine this with conversion rate testing. And if we do something like that, we can actually give individual users a consistent site-wide experience. But nonetheless, this is what Google sees. Google requests a page at a time. If it requests Seattle, it gets a control page. If it requests Austin, it gets a variant page. And setting it up in this way allows us to do the kind of statistical analysis that we need to in order to figure out if this change was a good idea once we've controlled for all of the other confounding variables that could be going on. So I mentioned user testing and conversion rate testing before. Let's just quickly look at the differences between search testing and conversion rate testing. In a conversion rate test or a user test, there are two versions of every single page, and we split the audience. So we designate some users as being in group A, some users as being in group B. And the users in group A get the control version of the page, and the users in group B get the variant version of the page. That doesn't work for an SEO test because Google or any search engine crawler would only be in one or other of those buckets, right? You'd put the crawler in either group A or group B, at which point they're just being treated as a single user, and there's no analysis to do. You can't tell differently how they would experience those two different variations. So what we do with an SEO test, as I've just described, is instead of splitting the audience, instead of putting the users into two buckets, we put the pages into two buckets. And we split the pages and we say some of those pages are control pages, some of those pages are variant pages. And this diagram hopefully makes that a little bit clearer. And up to now, as SEOs, we just haven't had access to this kind of data. We're like the coaches of the NBA in 2001, where we didn't have at our fingertips every single video of our opponents' moves in every single situation, enabling us to do statistical analysis on who shoots where better from where, which shots are the highest likelihood chances, and so forth. And up till now, we've been in a very similar boat to the way that coaches had to operate without that data. We had to work by eye, right? So by whether things seemed like a good idea. And I've been a part of this myself. I don't know if anyone has been in the industry long enough to remember the SEO Moz ranking factor surveys. So I think I first contributed to this in something like 2007. And this was back before Moz.com was even called Moz.com, when it was SEOmoz.org. And I contributed to this for a few years. And this was asking experts around the industry about different Google ranking factors. Is this a ranking factor? How confident are you? What evidence have you seen? Those kinds of things. I found this increasingly hard to answer over the years, and the growth of machine learning and artificial intelligence in the algorithm has probably pushed this even further, to the extent that I don't think it really makes a ton of sense to just work off what experts think, even if you aggregate that data. That was all we had. So that was how we had to work. We could also pay attention to what Google said on the record, off the record, officially and unofficially. I've actually given whole presentations about analyzing Google's statements. And I gave one called From the Horse's Mouth. The link is in the show notes. And this is interesting. I still encourage people to do this. We still want to know the future direction of Google, but it doesn't give us that kind of granular insight for a few reasons. Firstly, we never know when they're telling us the whole truth. And secondly, we don't know how it's going to play out in a competitive webmastering situation where we're trying to do stuff, our competitors are trying to do stuff. It's all happening all at once. It's very difficult to tell. If we make this change, is it going to result in a meaningful amount more traffic? Is it going to result in the business outcomes that we want? Those are very difficult questions to answer. And there are skeptics around. This is Charles Barkley talking about how skeptical he is about advanced analytics in basketball, where he says, the analytics don't work at all. It's just crap that people who are really smart made up to try and get in the game because they have no talent. And, when it comes to basketball, I'll take that from Chuck. I think it's fair to say he knows a little bit more about basketball than I do. But when it comes to SEO, I think maybe I know more than Charles does. So let's just experiment with this and look at whether we really need this kind of data that comes out of testing. And my argument is that you do. You might think it's okay. We can just look at Google Analytics data, for example. We can just go, okay, let's look at what happened before, make the change, look at what happened afterwards, and we can be confident that our test was good. Well, I just don't think that works. Let's take an example. This is real data. Green arrow shows a particular test, a particular change deployed, rather. So this is a bit like the one with the crossover that I showed earlier. This is some keyword research data implemented on the site, goes live on that green arrow day. You can see the annotation in the analytics data there. And immediately we see a little bit of a drop off. So the following week, traffic is lower. This is organic traffic to just the pages that were changed. Traffic's a bit lower than it was when we made the change. So we might immediately think, oh, this was a bad idea. We should roll it back and get back to how we were. You might think that. But you also might be aware that there's confounding factors. There's other stuff going on around us. And this is a B2B SaaS website. And so a lot could be going on. What if I told you there was a Google update just here? Because there was. So it's possible that the drop is actually nothing to do with the change we made, entirely due to a change in the Google algorithm. Secondly, this is in the US market, and this week is actually Thanksgiving. So I didn't have the dates showing up on the timeline at first, but now we can see, oh, this is the whatever it is, third Thursday in November, and we can see that the drop, oh well, it coincides with Thanksgiving. And as I said, the B2B SaaS, it's quite likely that a lot of people are eating turkey instead of looking for some new software. So maybe this is seasonality. Maybe this has nothing to do with the change we made after all. Just zoom out a little bit. Okay, so this is the same data that we were just looking at, that same period where we made the change. You can see the drop week over week. This is where the Google algorithm update happened, and this is Thanksgiving. And let's just pull that out and say, okay, what happened over the next 3 months? Well, it's a little bit hard to see on that screen, so let's just pull those green lines forward. Oh, by the time we're into January, and even before that, traffic is back above the level it was at when we made the change. And the drop off there is over New Year, of course, but every other week we're seeing traffic beating the level that it was at when we made the change. So maybe this was a good idea after all. I mean, ultimately, I think what we see when we look at this is it's just impossible to tell. You look at this and you say, well, it could have been the algorithm update. It could have been the seasonality. It could have been that we made a change that was a good idea. It could have been that competitors made some changes in that time. Maybe a competitor dropped out of the rankings in early January, and we saw a boost as a result. We find it very, very difficult to tell whether our particular change resulted in the change that we were looking at there. This example here is actually an example of a case where you have to shoot the mid-range, because this was done on a small website. It actually was on the SearchPilot website. I actually made this change. So I did some keyword research. I made some changes to titles and meta information across a bunch of our case study pages. And our site, ironically, we're not in our own target market. SearchPilot's own website is too small to run the kind of SEO tests that we're talking about here. Really, they work best on very, very large, typically consumer-facing websites, right? In travel, e-commerce, jobs, real estate, media, not B2B SaaS. So unfortunately, just like in my basketball game, I have to shoot the mid-range, right? I never could shoot the three very well, and I can't dunk anymore. So I have to pull up and shoot the mid-range. And similarly on the SearchPilot website, we had to just shoot the mid-range. But what we sacrificed there is that means that we can't ever really be sure whether that change was a good idea or not. We have to follow our instincts. But at the elite level, that's not good enough, because you're competing against people who are using those advanced statistics. And so, the rest of what we're going to talk about here is how to evolve our strategy with this in mind. Before we get into that, I want to just talk for a second about the fact that I have experienced this in a variety of roles. So before the job I'm doing today, which is running SearchPilot, I founded a company called Distilled, which is an SEO agency originally based here in the UK, and then with offices in the US as well. In early 2020, just before the pandemic hit, we spun SearchPilot out of Distilled into its own new startup and sold the rest of the agency and the Search Life conference series over to a company called Brain Labs. And so these days I'm running SearchPilot. And so I just did want to explicitly address the elephant. This is the elephant in the room, which is, this is the elephant. The elephant is SearchPilot. The elephant is the fact that I run an SEO testing company. So of course I'm going to sit here and say, oh, we should run more SEO tests. But actually, I think that gets the chicken confused with the egg, because it's not the case that the causality runs from, oh, I just accidentally started running an SEO testing company, so I'm going to start talking about that. We very explicitly didn't want to build another reporting or diagnostic SEO tool. And that's not to knock them, that's not to throw any shade. That's just, that market is very well served. There's some phenomenal tools out there for diagnosing problems and for measuring the problems that you found. What we wanted to do was actually create something that was an unfair edge, that helped our customers do better than their competition. And that's why we settled on testing. And so it's not that I run a testing company by accident, and so I'm going to say my opinion is we should run more tests. It's the other way around. I think we should run more tests, which is why I'm working all the time on building a capability to make it easier for folks to run these kinds of tests. So with the elephant out the way, let's dive into what this means for strategy. What does this mean for the future of SEO? Well, I think it means different things at different levels in the organization. And we can think of this at the company leadership level, right? The folks out, not even necessarily marketers themselves, but who are making strategic decisions for the company. We can talk about it at the marketing leadership level, so the CMO, VP of marketing, that kind of level. And we can think about the practitioners, the actual SEO team who are making decisions on the ground about details and day-to-day. We're going to talk about what it means for each of them. So for the executives, I think what we want folks to know whose business is reliant on organic search visibility, which is a huge number of businesses, they need to know that this is possible. They need to know that their competitors are going to be doing this kind of thing. And this is the capability of modern SEO testing, that because their competitors are doing it, they're going to need to get their act together to be able to compete in that kind of world. And they're going to need answers to, how are we going to make sure that we're not rolling out changes that are damaging to our organic search performance? How are we going to make sure that we're not wasting our engineering team's time building features that are never going to benefit our organic search performance? And how are we going to capture those uplifts that can only come from being able to experiment with bolder tests, safe in the knowledge that we'll detect whether they're a good idea or not? But that it does require investment. It's hard. Your team is going to come to you saying, I need budget for people, tools, software, in order to be able to build out an SEO testing program like this. And really, we're talking about those very big websites where you've probably got people on staff already. So your budget is already 6 figures a year, and you need to build out that capability to be able to run large numbers of these tests in order to be able to compete. For the marketing leadership, so the folks that the SEO team reports to, think VP marketing, that kind of level, there is, it kind of basically boils down to like the basketball strategy. Don't settle for the mid-range, get to the rim. Try and cut out the untested on-site changes, and build an SEO strategy that comprises developing new content, building out new site sections, new pages, and then deploying winning tests that we're highly confident are going to work, the dunks of the SEO strategy. And from that, we can build out business cases that actually get to real metrics, right? This particular project cost that, generated this business benefit, this much more revenue. And that becomes a very powerful tool within the business arsenal. And then we can start setting goals and metrics around a successful SEO testing program. So not just whether an individual test wins, but are we running enough tests? Do we have a high enough win rate? Are we getting the overall uplifts that we hope for as a result of all of this effort? I've actually written a couple of posts about this. If you want to find something that's useful for the C-suite, so CMO or peers, then I wrote one about what the C-suite needs to know about SEO testing. And I also talked about what marketing leadership needs to know about modern SEO. So that's more like a VP of marketing. Maybe they were hands-on in the SEO channel a decade ago, but they now have a remit to manage budget and people and a team, and they aren't necessarily staying up to date with the finest nuances of what's changing in the SEO world. So I've written a post that can catch them up. I also don't have it in my slides, but I'm literally right in at the moment launching a new podcast, which will be relevant to these folks. It's called the Business Class Lounge. If you go on the SearchPilot blog, at searchpilot.com, you can find the most recent post is announcing the launch of the Business Class Lounge podcast. It's where I'm going to be interviewing marketing leaders, so CMOs, VPs of marketing, those kind of folks, to find out how they really think about budgeting, leadership, management, forecasting, all of these kind of areas that I think are a mystery to many folks who work in the channel. So if you are one of these folks, or you report to one of these folks, or you're a founder who has to manage one of these folks, I hope that my podcast is going to be interesting to you as well. But let's talk about the team, because I imagine that many of the folks on the call today are practitioners, right? Actual SEO individuals, people with SEO in their title, either working agency side or in-house. And you're probably most interested in the tactical impact. So what can you do differently in the SEO channel as a result of all of this research and all this effort that we're putting in? So let's dive into some things and learn from what's worked and what hasn't. The first thing I want to mention is the search engine's understanding of JavaScript has improved, but it's definitely still not perfect. In our SEO tests, we've seen all three of the different kinds of outcomes. We've seen negative impacts from JavaScript. So in other words, JavaScript reliance hurting the organic search visibility of websites. This particular test was at -6%. We've seen no impact. So a ton of energy expended to move to pre-rendering some content so that it was served up in the HTML rather than being rendered client-side or Googlebot having to do the work. And turned out neutral. It turned out all that effort was for nothing because Google was actually rendering that template fine already. And we've even seen positive results. So even though on JavaScript can be a negative, we've seen it be a positive when it improves the user experience. And this was a website that was able to speed things up in terms of responsiveness and user signals. And as a result, got an improvement in search visibility as well. But the key thing is it can be negative. And so unfortunately, that means that you can't run your SEO tests purely in JavaScript. You do need to do this kind of server side, because if you do run your tests in JavaScript, every single test you do is testing not only the hypothesis that you intend to test, but also the question of whether Google is going to interpret that JavaScript correctly and whether it's already interpreting the JavaScript correctly. Point number two from our testing experience is that user experience is definitely growing in importance. And Google would like you to think this, but they'd like you to think many things. So we're never quite sure what we should take at face value in terms of Google's statements. But we found more and more UX-centric SEO tests coming out as winners. This particular one was a modal interstitial pop-up JavaScript, email capture box, particularly on mobile. This can be very damaging. Google said this can cause drops in traffic, but we need to test to find out what's really going on. But this was a significant negative impact. So user experience is definitely becoming more and more important, and the reality is starting to match up with the rhetoric of what Google has said. Hidden content, in contrast, Google says this well done hidden content is fine. They say it doesn't matter. They understand, they say, that on the mobile screen in particular, screen space is very limited, and so you might need to use expanding accordions or tabs to have content not be visible on page load and only become visible on some kind of user interaction. And yet, in repeated tests across lots of different websites in different industries, we have seen an improvement in organic visibility when that content is moved out of those hidden tabs and is visible on page load, maybe with a scroll, but with no page interaction to cause it to be loaded. And this is an interesting example. I don't think Google is probably lying exactly. I think the fact that we see uplifts from these kind of changes is probably not that they are explicitly penalizing or down ranking the content that is not visible. I think it's probably a mixture of unintended consequences, second order consequences of the fact that they have a lot going on to try and analyze the quality of a page, the user experience of a page, how humans are going to view different variations of a page. And some combination of those factors is meaning that at least in some cases when we test this, we're getting an improvement when we stop relying on things like accordions and tabs and sliders and so forth, and actually just having that content visible in the scroll on page load has been beneficial. And so I think that's quite an interesting, quite big deal, and something that we're definitely continuing to retest, because you've got to listen to what Google says, but at the moment the testing is coming out that way around. This one is not very surprising, and yet it's underused in my experience by professional SEOs, which is that anything that affects the way your snippet appears in the search results has a huge impact on your organic traffic levels. And this probably shouldn't be a surprise. Colleagues in paid search have for years had a big chunk of their job being optimizing the advert that they show to searchers. And partly because we haven't had the tools to really do this properly, that hasn't, in my experience, been a big part of organic search, a big part of SEO in the time up till now. I'd say partly because we haven't had the tools to measure it, but it's no surprise that it can make a radical difference. That the same website, same page can have a radically different performance depending on whether it has a really compelling snippet in the search results or not. And I won't get deep into the specific tests here. This particular one was a test about whether Google was rewriting metadata to make it, and whether they were better at rewriting it than our original text. You can go read the case study about that. But we see that for all kinds of stuff. That particular one trended like this. Quick note on these kinds of tests is any change to titles are particularly important to test because they can affect both ranking and click-through rate. So they have that double whammy effect. So some of our biggest swings in each direction, some of our biggest positives and our biggest negatives have been actually title tag modifications. So that's a particular one to watch out for. But of course, it also means that structured data can make a big difference because adding structured data changes the display of your snippet, changes how your website looks in the search results. This particular one's incredible. I have nothing to do with this, but just look at the total number of different things going on in this screenshot. We've got breadcrumbs, we've got ratings, star reviews, other reviews, prices, FAQ markup. It's incredible the number of different bits of richness going on in this snippet. These rarely bring you a sustainable advantage because anything you do, your competitors will no doubt copy. And there is a bit of a prisoner's dilemma kind of instance going on where maybe you'd be better off if nobody in your industry implemented structured data, because it does give away a lot of that information and all of that power to the search engines. But, it is a prisoner's dilemma. If you don't, they're going to. And if they're going to, you might as well, because you get benefit as well. And so our advice on this is to move fast, move early when there's new structured data available or new forms of rich snippet in your industry. Test very, very quickly as soon as it's available to see if it's going to be beneficial to you and roll it out quickly if it is. Internal linking, hugely powerful. These are many of our most complicated tests, but some of our most powerful tests. And I'm not going to get deep into how you run SEO tests for internal linking because there's quite a lot of complexity to it. So I've given a whole other presentation on that, which is linked to here. You can go and check out the slides and the recording. But suffice it to say that the baseline of what is going on here is that when you're doing an internal linking test, you're expecting to see changes potentially on the pages that you make the change on, where the HTML has changed, and potentially on the pages that now have new links pointing to them or have had links removed that used to point to them. And so what we do is we set up multiple measurement sections. So we make the change on one set of pages and we measure the results across numerous different groups of pages on the website. Can get complicated. I'd recommend diving deep into that presentation for more on that. A very hot topic just now with the launch of ChatGPT is the capability of computer-generated content. And I have been saying for some time that this is ready for testing with care. I think there's still absolutely a place for human moderation and editorial control because these computers mainly do have a bit of a tendency to make things up, but there is definitely an opportunity at scale. But more importantly, content quality is a surprisingly interesting ranking factor. We've seen cases where having some content, even if it's pretty terrible content, pretty templated, not even computer generated, but just literal boilerplate, is better than having none, right? The pages perform better with that content than without it. We've also, crucially though, seen cases where upgrading the quality of that content has resulted in organic traffic boosts time after time. So whether it's just going from complete boilerplate to templated to unique content to more expensive unique content, we've seen benefits at each step of that way. Not deterministically, not every time, but that there definitely is some return to certain kinds of content quality, which is great. And I think it's probably a big part of what the future for Google has to hold is computers can make up all kinds of nonsense, but we're going to want to get the authoritative version. And so EAT is really going to come into play. Hence, a slide on EAT. There are increasing tests, just like the user experience level of things, where we're seeing signals that demonstrate your expertise, your authoritativeness, your trustworthiness, can result in uplifts. But it doesn't just work blindly. We have quite one of our most popular pages on our site actually is a test where just trying to add basic authorship information to a page resulted in no measurable benefit at all. That's not to say that authorship isn't a thing. It's not to say that authoritativeness and trustworthiness isn't a thing. I think they absolutely are. We have other tests that move in the other direction, but you need to be very careful with just blindly adding EAT signals. We have a bunch of evidence that it doesn't quite work like that. And so we need to be running these tests to see if things are actually moving the needle for real users and whether we can detect that in the results. And finally, one of my most surprising results that I got included here is I really don't think in, what are we, the third decade of the 21st century, that the ordering of the HTML, the actual code ordering of the page, should make a blind bit of difference. We've tested cases where we use CSS to keep the visual display exactly the same. So the user experience did not change. The users see the same page in both these cases, but in one case, there was a load of stuff before you got to the real content, right? Sidebar, other navigation, those kinds of things. We just moved the main content above that and saw an uplift in search performance, which, for the record, I don't think should work, but we've seen it work in a few different controlled test environments now. So loads more of these on our website. Go to searchpilot.com/newsletter and you can get them all in your inbox as soon as they're published. We publish a new one every 2 weeks and you can be the first to receive them. And we're nearly there. We're wrapping up. I've got a last few minutes, I think. In that time, I've just got a little bit of bonus information for you. So just one other key insight beyond what we're seeing here. And that is that if you think about a gambling situation, you think about going into a casino and playing a game of pure chance like roulette. You play once, you might win. Happened to a friend of mine back in the one of my basketball friends actually walked in, bet on a single number, of course, red 23, MJ's number, and it came up and he won hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But he proceeded to lose it over the rest of the weekend. And the reason for that is that if you play a lot of times, the casino is definitely going to win because they have that statistical edge. And so what we see here is that when you have an edge, you want to play more. You want more iterations, more goes. And the folks who made the shot chart move like this also spotted that same insight. They realized they had a statistical edge over their opposition because they were now taking higher value shots on average, right? With their 3-point shots or with their higher percentage chance shots, they've cut out the mid-range. They have a percentage advantage over their competition. So they start focusing on speed, getting more possessions in every game. And this is the same timeline that over which we saw the change in the shot chart. Over that time, we see almost 10% increase in possessions per game, an even higher increase among the teams that have lent most into these statistical trends. And bringing it back to SEO, we are the casino in this example. We're the ones who want to go faster. If we have this statistical edge, we have these test results on our side, we want more goes. We want to run more tests more quickly than our competition. And it's not just me saying this. There's some academic arguments backing up, and you can read the actual academic paper if you want to. I'll just give you a minute to digest the academics here. I'm kidding. I'm not going to make you read that. Let's just summarize the interesting bits. So what this says is it matters whether you can predict winners when you're determining the optimal strategy. It matters whether you can predict winners, and it matters whether on average they are frequent and small or rare and big. If the wins are small and frequent, you want to run a smaller number of tests to a higher degree of confidence. And you can be pretty confident that you're going to get these winners. You can guess which ones they're going to be reasonably well. So you're running a very detailed test to say, okay, on average, they're small. So we're going to have to run a very accurate test, but it doesn't matter. We're fairly confident this is going to work. On the other hand, if the wins are on average large but rarer, it's better to run more tests, go hunting for these rare, big wins, and do it even at the expense of statistical confidence and power if you need to. So run more tests, even if they're less powerful tests, because the wins, when they come, are bigger. And so even the less powerful test is probably going to detect them. And the final punchline is website experimentation tends to be this latter kind. It tends to bring relatively rare, but relatively large wins. And this is the boat we're in, running SEO tests, and backed up by our data at SearchPilot as well. And when you're in that situation, test cadence, test speed is the metric that you should be judging things against. And so I like to think about the kind of maturity curve where you go from just being able to run some SEO tests to being able to connect those tests to business outcomes and revenue, to being able to focus on test speed and the whole testing program as a whole. And these also kind of map to the layers of the organization that I was talking about earlier, and different considerations at different levels. So if you want to read more about SEO maturity frameworks, Heather Physiok, who's also spoken at this event, has a great deep dive into it. And I think you can overlay my SEO testing maturity onto her general SEO maturity plan. And this is what we're pushing for at SearchPilot. So we're celebrating testing cadence, greater test speed, and it's having some great results. So we're going to wrap up whole presentation in 3 slides, do winning tests and publish new content, and then go faster. If you want to crop one slide out, this is basically the whole thing in one go. So feel free to screenshot this just now and tweet it or whatever else. This is my fundamental point, is that modern on-site SEO should be trying to cut out untested changes, focus on producing new pages and on deploying winning tests, and that will help you win. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of actions. For everyone, go subscribe to our case study newsletter. This will get you all of the test results from new SEO tests as we publish them every couple of weeks at searchpilot.com/newsletter. And if you're out there in the SEO equivalent of the MBA, working on these massive websites with huge amounts of traffic, then I definitely want to speak to you. So I will give a presentation like this for your team for free. There's a page on the SearchPilot website where you can get in touch with me. I'm very easy to find. My Twitter DMs are open as well, at Will Critchlow. So drop me a line. Final thing is just to end with a massive dunk, I think. So I hope your SEO program ends up looking like that. My name is Will Critchlow. I'm the CEO at SearchPilot, and you can reach me. All my contact details are here. It's been great seeing you today.
Will, thank you so much. I think it was so beneficial and educational, and thanks a lot for the great presentation in your time. And I think this presentation has already been one of my favorites in recent events I joined, to be honest. And
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And having you here after 6 years means a lot to us, to be honest. And if you have some time, there are some questions waiting for you. I think you already answered.
I'll swing over to the Q&A now, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't want to talk on the behalf of the attendees. So I think I can read them and ask to you if you like.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, great then. The first question is there any case study you can share with us to show the effect of A/B testing on SEO? For example, after applying the changes, the organic traffic increased up to 50%. Is there a case like this on SearchPilot? We can find it.
Yeah, we have loads of these case studies. So I'm just going to link to them in the comments, and you can dig into all kinds of different deep dives. And feel free to drop me a line on Twitter if there's specific kinds of examples that you want as well.
Okay, I'm publishing it. Thank you. Great. So the other question is, sometimes Google doesn't show my title tags, which were written by considering all the rules of Google, but still shows some keywords from my content as a title on SERP. Do you have any idea how to fix it?
Yes, well, maybe. The first point is, I would say, so this has been increasing. So Google is increasingly rewriting not only title tags, but also the search snippets that appear. So the meta descriptions get overwritten, these kinds of things. And I have a variety of complicated thoughts on this. Firstly, Google is actually quite good at this quite often. So you don't always want to prevent them doing it. Sometimes their version is better. We have some test results suggesting, particularly for meta descriptions, that Google's version can be better, even if it looks to our eyes less good, primarily because Google has a key advantage versus us, which is we can only write one meta description per page, but they can show a different search snippet for any different query that page ranks for. And so what we've seen with some of our customers is Google is pulling different bits of content for different queries. So that search snippet is more relevant to the query, even if it's less well written, because they've just pulled random bits of stuff off the page. And so they actually get a better click-through rate than we can. So I wouldn't necessarily assume you want to stop them. However, you can run tests on this kind of thing. And I'm going to drop another link in, which is a colleague of mine, did a whole load of research into this, and I wrote up a blog post that talked about how we go about doing SEO testing in a world where Google is rewriting titles.
Yeah, great. It's just a great example for him, I guess. Thank you so much. I think you already answered it. I saw on your presentation, but have you ever tested any page which content was written by AI? If yes, what was the result? If no, what is your expectations?
The short answer is yes. Unfortunately, all of our customers who have done this, no one's prepared to talk about it publicly yet. I think there's still obviously a bit of concern about how this might go down if people were to know who was doing it. So I am aware of some tests. I am aware of some positive tests. They haven't all been positive, but I personally am inclined to think it is definitely better already than boilerplate, templated content. But it is not necessarily as good as human written content. And you definitely, just from a brand safety perspective, never mind an organic search perspective, you're going to want to make sure there's a human editorial review step in there, because at the moment, none of the AI tools have any kind of guarantee of correctness in them. And they can just make up nonsense. So it's a tool. It's a powerful tool. I would always put it through human review at this stage.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you. And I think it's also connected question. Do you think Google will start release new updates like Panda to take the control of AI generated content?
Yes, is the short answer. I think probably. So there was an interesting post from Google the other day where they talked about the names of the different systems that they have in action in their ranking algorithms these days. And it talked about how Panda was one that isn't active anymore because it's been rolled into the core algorithm, which I thought was interesting. I think Panda itself is a play on this. Certainly, some of the EAT focused updates are a play on this. I'm going to be very interested to see. I think my bias at the moment is actually that they will probably release updates that what's the right way to put it, that are negative for people using artificially, machine learning generated content badly.
Yeah, makes sense.
Which I think is a different thing to necessarily targeting that content. I think those same updates will also be bad for bad human written content, and they might be good for good machine written content. So I think they're going to really lean into the EAT side. They're going to really dial up the we trust this if it's from a good source, we trust it if it's authoritative, we trust it if we can validate that we believe it's truthful and trustworthy. And I think Google is probably at least as far ahead as the public tools that we've got access to, right? The ChatGPT and GPT-3 and 4 and so forth. Google has these tools as well. So I don't know. My current suspicion is that they're going to see that the boat has sailed on this content. The internet is going to be full of this content. And the problem comes when the content is poor, not when it doesn't matter who wrote it. If I write something terrible, that's a problem just as much as if a computer writes something terrible. And if a computer writes something good, arguably that's as good as if a human wrote it. There are some nuances, but I think they're going to focus on that. And so we're going to see impacts on poor quality content, whether it was computer generated or not. More impacts, obviously. That's the same as been going on since Panda, but we're going to see more of it.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And one last question from Melissa. As a 1-year SEO content writer, I want to improve myself in the technical part. What would be the top 3 pieces of advice you could give me in this decision?
My top one probably is build your own website from as close to scratch as you can, whether that's getting yourself set up with WordPress or even on a static site generator or even just building your own HTML. Even if you'd never publish it to the web, just building it on your own computer can be valuable. But publishing it to the web has the benefit that you will learn a little bit more about how domain names work and how hosting setup works and those kinds of things. And I think this, for me, is the single thing that is it's both the steepest learning curve and one of the kind of most effective, because you start to learn how the internet works, how the web holds together. And then from there, once you've got your own playground, you can start publishing content on there. You can see how it performs and start running little experiments. So you can start. I would then turn to there's some great beginner's guide material. Moz has a great beginner's guide. Ahrefs has a great beginner's guide, and just work through some of those things, but also then try and put it into practice. So when they talk about a 301 redirect, go and implement a 301 redirect on your website. And this is a lot of work, but it's, in my opinion, the best way to get ahead with that stage of learning.
Okay. Great. Thank you for your answer for all the questions. And again, thanks a lot for for the presentation as well and your time. And
thank you for having me on.
See you for the future events as well.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you so much.